So, in Ois Ches, the Rebbe will explain how the different levels of Atik, Pnimius Atik, Atik, and Adich, how they impact, uh, whether it's by dominance, they override, or they integrate, or in a way of above altogether. We'll see how the Hamshacha of Yeducha, the Rebbe wants to explain, the Hamshacha Chasidecha is in a higher way than the other Hamshachas than would be from a tzaddik or a yosher. But the Rebbe explains that Atik and Adich are Rotzen and Tainug, and we'll understand it from the way Rotzen works and the way Tainug works, and then we'll see the advantage of Pnimius HaKeser Chasidecho, as it works. Look inside. Well, Inyan who the idea is the Adich v'Atik hem dugmas rotzen v'tainug. Adich, which is Chitzonis HaKeser, is like rotzen. It's the will. It's the level of rotzen by the person. We will call that rotzen. And Atik is the level of tainug. That's the level of delight. And the way we see how rotzen impacts and we see how the delight impacts, that's the way when we bring down from Arich or we bring down from Atik, which are bedugmas rotzen v'tainug. U'me'achilukim shebein rotzen v'tainug hu, amongst the differences between rotzen, the power of will of a person, and the power of tainug, the delight of the person. When we see what's the difference, how they impact the person. The pa'ulas harotzen b'hakoiches v'ha'evodim hi b'derech shelita. The impact, how rotzen impacts the koiches and the limbs in a way of dominance. I know, what does this mean in the way of dominance? Shakoiches v'ha'evodim mitzad atzmom nishorim betivom k'moi shehayu koidam. The powers, the limbs, they remain on their own, they remain as they are by nature. The will doesn't change them, but controls them, dominates them, but they remain in their nature as they were before. Elo shaharotzin sholet alehem. But it is the rotzin that dominates them. Umachriach oisom sheyu k'fi harotzin, and it forces them, the koiches and the vodim, that they should go according to the will of Hashem, that they should have to follow what the rotzin wants, which is which is opposite of their nature. Meaning, there's no change of nature, but rather an overpowering by the rotzin to do as the rotzin wants, while the nature remains in its original state, doesn't want. But the rotzin is stronger and dominates and overrides them. That's the way rotzin impacts the body and the limbs. On the other hand, we have the impact that takes place in the powers of the person and his limbs through the level of pleasure, through the level of delight of tainug. Kivon shehatainug ha'pnimius v'hachayus da'koiches v'hevorim atzmo. Since the delight, that's the inner and the energy, the vitality of the powers and the limbs themselves. So, lochein ha'pu'ula shenasis bohem al yidei hatainug. Therefore, the impact that is brought about in them through the level of Tainug, it's not in a way of dominance vehechrech and force. They themselves become such. So the delight changes around that the limbs and the powers go along, they are turned into the level of what Tainug wants. So that's the way Rotzin works in a way of force, dominance. Tainug works in a way of inner to change around themselves. So this is the way it works by the human body. Similarly, it's the Rotzin and Tainug, Arich, Rotzin and Tainug, Atik is Tainug, the way it works and impacts in the world when it changes around. Similar is above. Chanukah v'yochel shenase b'hadarga dihishtalshlus al yidei ha'hamshocha dichitzonius hakeser shenimshechus al yidei hatzadikim. The change, so to speak, we have to change in the level of ishtalshlus. The person was, God forbid, was sick, and we want to change it into a different, to give him the person to become healthy. So if you reach the level when it comes from the level of chitzonis hakeser shenimsheches al dei tzadikim, that comes through tzadikim. They are mamshich from chitzonis hakeser, from arich. The gam kishem mitzad b'chinas ha'hishtalshelus yeshna gezeira. That although that when from the perspective of the level of ishtalshelus there is a decree, sheloi tiyam shochas ha'ashpo, that they should not extend that level of flow. V'yidei sha'atzadik mamshich rotzon chodesh mehakeser shelemaylo mehishtalshelus, through the tzaddik drawing down a new rotzon from the level of keser, which is higher ishtalshelus, but in this case chitzonis hakeser mizbateles hagezeda, the decree is nullified. Hu ba'ofen deshlitu memshala, so it overrides and it dominates and it rules over the hishtalshelus. Tzaddik moishel beyiras elikim, with the yiras elikim of the tzaddik, he dominates. Sha'arotzin de l'maylo mihishtalshelus shoyle to moishel al ha'hishtalshelus, that the will of from above hishtalshelus, which the tzaddik brought down from arich, dominates and rules over hishtalshelus. Bitul hagizeda shemitzad b'chinas hishtalshelus. But when we talk about the gezeda becoming nullified from the level of hishtalshelus, alidei hamshokas pnimiyus hakeser, by bringing down the inner level of keser, which is through the level of yoshor, which is the level of tainug, shenimshechas alidei ha'avodah the yishorim, which comes down from the level of yishorim. It's not in a way of dominance like Rotzen does, like Arich, Elo. The key on Shat Tainug, the Pnimius HaKeser, who Apnimius the Hahishtalshelus, since the delight of the inner part of Keser is the inner of the Hishtalshelus, it's the essence, the inside of Ishtalshelus. It's not overriding it, but it changes it around. When you bring Dora down, the inner of Rotzim v'Tainug, the Pnimius HaKeser, from Pnimius HaKeser, which is the level of Atik, bringing down Pnimius HaKeser, which is Tainug, which is the inner of the Hishtalshlus. Sharotzen Shom Hu Shatia HaShpoah, that the desire there, that there should be the Hashpoah, Bitla Gzeira. So then the way that, when you have the Tainug over there, so then that Rotzen, that there should be the Hashpoah, that comes from Primis HaKeser, Bitla Gzeira Ugam Mitzad Hishtalshlus Gufa. So the Gzeira is nullified not in a way of dominance, but the Hishtalshlus is changed around when it comes from the level of Tainug, when it comes from the level of Atik, when it comes from the level of Primis HaKeser. So this kind of change around that takes place through the level of Atik, Primis HaKeser, through Tainug. So this fits with what our sages tell us. This is where our sages of blessed memory said, Kol hamelamed is ben hamaoretz Torah. If you teach the son of an ignorant person, you teach him Torah. So the Gemara says, Afilu HaKadosh Baruch Hu goyzer gezeira mevatlo b'shvilo. Even if Hashem makes a decree, Hashem nullifies it for this person who is teaching the Amaoretz Torah. The Eibishter will nullify it before that person. Shenamar, because the pasuk says, "The imtoitzi yokor mezoilel." If you take out the precious one from the zoilel, from the Amaoretz, kifiti, then you'll be like my mouth, just like an Eibishter makes a gezerah. Tashans the Gemara that you will also be in charge and you will make the gezerah. You will be, the Eibishter makes a gezerah. Kifitiya, you'll be like, you make the gezerah, you'll be mevatla. The loshin mevatla, when you say the language that he used, that the Eibishter is mevatl bishviloi, mevatlo bishviloi, which the Chazal use, moire shakodesh baruch hu mevatloi bishviloi. So that points to that the Eibishter is it mevatl for him, meaning he's not goizer and mevatlo, but we say that the Eibishter himself, it's not that the tzaddik is going against what Hashem was goizer, but the merit of this tzaddik is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu changes around, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu mevatlo b'shviloi. So that there's a change that HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself is mevatl for him. The Yeshloimar, and that's, we can say, the Rebbe said this is greater than the level of tzaddik, the regular tzaddik, in which it says Geyser Mavatla, that Geyser, that means that the tzaddik is Mavatl, but here we're saying that the Eibishter is Mavatl, it for it. The Yeshloimar, the Yeshloimar, Shazer Naile Yoiser Mizeh, Shakadosh Baruch Hu Geyser v'Tzadik Mavatl. We can say this level, then we're saying Kadosh Baruch Hu Mevatla is a higher level than when we talk about that the Eibishter makes a gezerah and the tzaddik is Mevatla. So what's the difference? In this case, because there's a change around that you accomplished, Lahitzi Yokar Mezoilel, you get it from a higher level. You get it from the level of Pnimius HaKeser. That's like the Yosha. And it explains here, the Shleimah said, Inyan the Iker HaTainug de Lamailo, Hu Mehachidush the Ishapcha Chashircha L'Noiro. The main pleasure when we talk about the delight, the level of Tainug of above, is from a novelty, from something new, which means is hapcha chashech l'neiro. When you turn darkness to light, if you just bring light, that's not a change around. That's not a chiddush. Taking choshech, which is dark, and making it into light, that's a chiddush. Which is lahotzi yokor mezela. To change around the ben ha'ma'oretz is to take out someone precious from a zayla, from the ha'ma'oretz. That's a chiddush. B'kivon shemeh avedose shel tzadik zeh. Since the service from the service of this tzaddik, who teaches and spreads Torah to the outside, also to the son of the Amoritz, Nasa Tainuk D'Lamaila. So he brings about the delight of above. The Eibishter has Tainuk from this. That's the chiddush, to take this Ben Amoritz and make it into Yoker. So therefore, how is the decree that this tzaddik who brings the level of tainuk, how does it take place? It's not in a way with the Kodesh Baruch Hu goes, the tzaddik is mevatel what the Eibishter wants, hainu. And that would mean that you're mevatel. HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes gzeira, and that stays. And you have the power to be mevatel that. Hainu shemitzad darged HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hishtalshlu, that means that because mitzad, the level of HaKadosh Baruch Hu hishtalshlu yesh gzeira. The gzeira exists. Elo shal yidei hadarged l'mayla mishtalshlu chitzonis hakeser, but through the level of higher than Ishtalshlus, the level of Chitzonis HaKeser, which the regular tzaddik has mevatel, shenem sheches al dehat tzaddik, that comes from the tzaddik, shemesh sheles al hadarga the Ishtalshlus, which dominates, rules over the level of Ishtalshlus, as we say, tzaddik moishel b'yiras alikim, that the tzaddik can dominate with the fear of God. So he has them, so he overpowers. He misbateles. It's nullified, and the tzaddik gets his way, that his gezeira sticks. He overrides HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He overrides Ishtalshlus. But when we're talking over here through the level of Tainuk, which you come to the level of Atikiim, but rather, when we have here the level of Tainuk, which is the Pnimius HaKeser, that he brought about, he brought about above from his service, because he brought level of Tainuk by level of Chiddush, bringing the Yokar Mizoilo. So then, when he's Mavatul Bitla Gzeidu Gam Mitzad HaDargid HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ishtalshlu, so the nullifying of that gezeira is also mitzad the level of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mevatlo. The Eibishter, Ishtalshu, even Ishtalshu, the inner, not as overriding it from the outside, but a change that even HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even mitzad Ishtalshu, the pnimius, the tainug, changes it around. So this would seem like even the Yashar, who reaches the level of Tainuk, which is the level of Atik, has the whole thing. The Rebbe is going to explain now that even Atik, because we say removed, it's still connected. It has to be removed from something. The true level of Amshocha, which is totally beyond, is Dafke Pnimius Atik, the level of Chasidecha. V'hine yadua, behold, it is known, Dagam she'atik hu melosh netak v'nivdal, even though Atik is the language, it's removed and separated. Mekol makoyim, but yet, it's removed, but it's removed from something. V'zeh shenikra b'shem Atik yoimin. removed from Yomim. Yomim is Sphiris, Hishtalshlus. This is removed from Hishtalshlus. Shehu netak mi Yomin, that he's removed from the Yomim. Move on. So it's understood. Shagam legabe hadarga da'atik yesh no Yomim. That also relative to the level of Atik, there is Yomim. It's removed, but they exist relative to them. In other words, he acknowledges them because he's removed from them. But he's removed from them. Sometimes we say the level of Atik Yomim, sometimes we'll have the Atik Stam. The Rebbe adds, not only Atik Yomim recognizes that there is Yomim, even when we say Atik Stam, even though we don't say it's removed from Yomim, it's still saying removed by definition means that there is something else. We say them is even more than this. Gam hadarga shenikra atik stam. Also the level which is called plain atik shalamaylam atik Yomim, which is higher than atik Yomim. Mekom okeim yet kivon shenikra b'shem atik. Since it is called by the name of Atik, the Pirush Atik hu shenetak. The meaning of Atik is that it's been removed. So we have to say that there is something from which is removed. So even though we don't say Atik Yomin, but it has to be removed from something. Being removed from something acknowledges that there's something else. And since that's the level of Atik, so therefore, how do we nullify the Gezerah, which comes from the level of Ishtalshlus? And we nullify it by drawing down, bringing down Atik. It's in a way of an act. That from the Ishtalshlus Yomim has been decreed that there should not be Hashpah. And when you bring down Atik, it's negated. So the Atik works to remove the Gzera. But as we explained before, the way the Gzera of Ishtalshus is bottled is when we bring down Atik is in a way that the Ishtalshus itself becomes that. But now we're coming to the highest level of bringing down Primis Atik. That's not in the way of an act, but it's by itself. Inyan, because the way it works is not that you have to be mevatel even by changing the shtalshus itself, but it's not in the way it's by itself. Inyan, the Pnimi is Atik, who Ein Sof Sheberad Lo. The Primis Atik is the Ein Sof in the Reisha de Lo Yisyada Kimavur Mamer. V'kivan the Pirush Ein Sof Hu She'ein Bo Shum Hagbala. And since the meaning of Ein Sof, it has no limitation. How to move on? Shalagab Ein Sof, that when we, relative to unlimited, Ein Shayich Loimar Shu Netak V'nivdel Me'inyan Haishtalshus. So it doesn't apply, it doesn't fit to say that Ein Sof is removed and is separate from Ishtalshus. In other words, in Ein Sof, there is no recognition of Ishtalshus because it's Ein Sof. Ki legabe Ein Shayich Inyan Ishtalshus. Relative to Ein Sof, it's not fit to be B'chal Ishtalshus. We're giving it a name, Berad Lo, Reisha L'Isada. So it's also a level. V'agam shu nimtzu Berad Lo. Harenevur b'Mamer shunimtzu beradlo. So the Mamer explains Kemoshu Batzmusay that it's in Radlo as it's in the Atzmus. And Memela, over there is no Ishtalshlus. So then move on. So from this is understood. The bit lag Zede Shemitzad Ha-Ishtalshlus. Ha-Yidei Ham-Shochas Ha-Gilui De-Pnimis Atihu, that the negation, being mevatel, nullifying the Gzeda. The Gzeda comes from Ishtalshlus, but when we nullify it by drawing down the Gilu Pnimis Atihu, Uloi Shalidei HaGilui the Pnimis Atik Nase Bitla Gzeda. It's not that when we bring down the Pnimis Atik, so now it becomes we nullify the Gzeda. But rather there's no Gzeda in the first place. Ki im shemetzad hagilu de pnimis atik, ein sof shel gradlo, but rather that for the inner revelation of atik, the ein sof shel gradlo, ein mokim b'lachatchila l'gzeda, there is no place to a gzeda b'lachatchila. It's not that you have to impact, there's no gzeda relative to the level of ein sof, which is totally higher than ishtalshlus. And this is what the Rebbe started off this whole explanation, that when it says over here, Chasidecho Yivarchucha, because they do it in a way that it's not in a way of a Pu'ula, but there is no Geseda in the first place when we're mamshich from the level of Pnimi Yisati. Yesh Levayat. So, based on this, we can explain Mashakos Ubahamaymer. The Mamer says the Inyan Chasidecha Yivarchucha, who could also be Yerushalmi. The Inyan Chasidecha Yivarchucha is like it says in Yerushalmi. Afilo hu HaKadosh Baruch Omer Hochin, V'at Omer Hochin. Eberster says so, and you say so. The Doch Kaima, the Diloi Kaima. Yours stays, but what I say doesn't stay. The Pirush, the Di Loi Kaima, who, when we say it does not exist, it's not kayim. It's not because you say so you override your mevatli gzeda kiim, but rather shayidei hagilu depnimius atik shenimshach aydei at omer hochin. When we talk about the revelation of pnimius atik from the chasidecha, that comes down when you say hochin, bringing down the level of pnimius atik. Ein mokem elachatchil gzeda. There's no place for Gzeda to begin with. Lekaima doesn't exist. That's the way it's overridden. V'zeu yeducha goyme v'chasidecha yivachucha. Sha'am shochem v'hamokim shebo yihu ha'idor ba'ofen de bracha b'derech memela. That how, this is as the Rebbe started off, this whole topic over here, that stavke de chasidecha, that to be mamshich from the place of where is Yeducha? Yeducha called Masecha. Ba'ofen the bracha, and to bring it down in the way of a bracha, b'derech memela by itself, not through any pu'ula, that's the level of chasidecha we take from Pnimius Atik. Because we bring it down from chasidecha through Pnimius Atik. And when you bring it from Pnimius Atik, is loy b'derech pu'ula. It's not in a way of an act, but automatically. So therefore, the Rebbe explained the different impact. Impact of Ratzon dominates. The impact of Tainug is a change, but it's still an act. But the impact of Pnimius HaKeser, the impact that Chasidecha bring down, is in a way that it's automatic. It's not even a way as an impact. And the Rebbe is going to continue speaking now that it also makes a difference, these different levels, how it actually impacts in this world, that what we're trying to impact, there's a difference between whether it comes from Arich or it comes from Atik or it comes from Primis Atik, as the Rebbe will continue to explain now in Oistes. Oistes. V'hinei hachiluk sheben gimul hamshochas hanal, the difference that we just discussed between these three hamshochas of Arich, Atik, Uprimius Atik. Those are the three. Arich and Atik, and then the inner of Atik, which is through Tzadik, Yoshor, and Chosid. Hugam b'inyan birurim. It's also in the aspect, not only where you bring it down, but how it is mevarer, the inyan birurim. The habirur shal yidei hagilu da'arich hu b'derech milmaylo lamata. The birur that takes place through arich is in a way from above to below. Hainu, that means, milmaylo lamata means shabiru dahatachton loy mitzada metzius shaloi, that the sorting out of the lower level is not because, not from the perspective of his entity. El adrab, the tachten opposes, remains tachten, but mipnei shal yidei shemeir boy gilu oir she'enoi be'erech elov, through the fact that by in the tachten shines a revelation of light which is not comparable to him, b'chinas sever, who misbattle mimitziusei, so he is negated from his existence. V'lochein. And therefore, gam lachrei habirur, even after the birur zeh shehatachten einoi menaged, the reason why the tachten does not oppose, who lifi shenisbattle mimitziusei ab yedei hagilu oir, is because he became negated from his existence because of the Gilu Oir. So he's just not opposing because he was misbattled, but he didn't change it. It remained the way it was before. His Metzius is there, opposing still, but he is overridden by the revelation of Sefer. So he doesn't oppose, but there's no change in the Metzius of the Tachten itself. He was negated from his existence through the revelation of light. But there was no change in the Metzius of the Tachten by himself. So that's when it comes from the level of Arich. But when the birur is from the Gilu Atik, that is also from the aspect and the matter of the Tachten itself. The Kivon Shahatainug Atik Hu Apnim Mizvachai Zechol Ishtalshus. Since the Tainug and the Atik is the inner and the energy and the vitality of all Ishtalshus Lachein Habiru Da Tachten Shal De Giluzeh. Therefore, the way the Tachten gets sorted out when there is the revelation from the level of Atik, which is the level of Tainuk, that's in a way the changes in the Tacht himself. As in the Mamer explained, Inyan habirur al hagilu sheheir de shlomo, the birur that took place through the revelation that came to Shlomo. The hagilu sheheir al de shlomo hagilu datik. That revelation through Shlomo is the revelation of Atik. So how did it take place? Shehagilu oir moshach elov sanitzitzus. That revelation of light drew to it the sparks. It's similar to a flame which draws to it the sparks. שהניצוצות שבתחתון נמשכו מעצמם להגילוי. And since the birur was in a way that the nitzotzes that were in the tachten on by themselves were drawn to the gilui, so that means it wasn't dominated, forced over them, but they on their own were drawn. How they move on birur so it's understood that the birur at that time by Shlomo HaMelech was mitzad the tachten itself. But still, that's not the ultimate. Kibon shegam legabe atik yesh hametziz the ishtalshlu. Since relative to atik, we said before, it's removed from it, but there is the existence of ishtalshlus. Umitzad seder ha-ishtalshlus, and from the order of ishtalshlus, geder ha-tachten hu shehu tachten. So how is the tachten the refined? He's defined by being the tachten hebrew delvin. Lochein hagilu oir de ha-elvin shenimshach boy. So therefore, the revelation of light of the Elyon that was nimshach in the tachten and also the sorting out. Therefore, that became through the gilu noisef olav. That's like something added. The birur is added something to it, but it's not in of itself really, because by itself there is still a conflict between Tachten and Elyon. So yes, it goes on its own, but it's something as if it's an addition, added to. But when we saw that through the revelation of Primisati, since the Primis Atik, which is the Ein Sof in Radlo, who bechlolu satzum Ein Sof, is in generally the essence of Ein Sof. Relative to the Atzma Ein Sof, does not apply any entity outside of Atzmus. There's nothing exists. But Adrabah, not only that nothing exists, but Hashem's true being is the being of all creations. When there is the Gimel Primis Atik, how does this mevarer the tachten nirgish b'chol davar shametzias shelagufa yelukus? So in every item, it's felt that his metzias itself is godliness. So the three different levels. Arich, when it impacts the bitter, it's like something from the outside. Atik is the inside, is the tainu, is the inside, but it's like an addition, because it's still metzias and non and ishtalshlus higher and so are separate. It's neta. But the level of Ein Sof and Radlo, which is the level of Atzmus over there, is the recognition that every Metzias is the Metzias of Ein Sof. So in every Gilu Pnimius Atik, you feel that the entity itself is godliness. V'zeu Yud should Mei Shlomo Nizbaru Rak Nitzitzis Elu, and that's why Shlomo, which was not the ultimate, was like the level of the Gili of Atik. So over there, only the Nitzoitzes, Shoyibem Eze Inyan Shel Oir, they had to have some level, some idea of light. Also, love is better call on Nitzoitzes, but in the future to come, only Nitzoitzes will be sorted out. Kibidur HaNitzoitzes Shal Yidei Gili Chitzoni Yisati. Because the sorting out of the Nitzoitzes, which is through the revelation of the external of Atik, because that was the Gilu that was in the days of Shlomo, was the Gilu of Chitzonius Atik. So you had the sparks attracted to the avuka, but they needed a spark. There needed to be something there in order to be attracted, because the gilui of Shlomo is chitzonius atik. Huloi mitzad hanitzoitzes atzmo, because that's not from the perspective, not the nitzoitzes themselves. El mitzad zeh shehagilui moisheches hanitzoitzes elov, but that comes because the revelation draws the nitzoitzes to it. V'lachein nisbareru oz rak nitzoitzes elu sheshayachim lahargish gilui oir. So only those sparks that are fitting to feel the revelation of light. But the bitter that takes place when Mashiach comes, ultimately, and that is through the revelation of Pnimius Atik, who al yishal yidei hagilui the Pnimius Atik. When there is the revelation of Pnimius Atik, mizgala b'chol davar, then in every item is revealed that their entity themselves is godliness. The lochein, laos in love in the future to come. Shaos yagilu de primisatik. It will be the revelation of the inner of Atik. Kam hanitzoitzes shenechshecho. Over those sparks that have been darkened, they're no longer shining. There's no oil there. They'll be elevated and including Kedusha. And more than this, also the item, physical item, not only the sparks in the physical, but the physical matters itself, will be in total unity with godliness. Commission is as the Rebbe explained in the Mamer Pod of Visholim that was said in Yutis Kislev. Another difference between Abirur Shahoya B'mei Shloim and Abirur Shahoya Lo Yiyah. And there's another distinction between the birur that wasn't Shloima, which we said at least needed a spark. The Rebbe said before, Mashekin lost love, even the darkened one. There's another difference between the birur that was by Shloima and the birur lost love. The birur hanitzoitze shaba'amim hoya alidei shabo elov. The way the sparks were sorted out in the nations was they came to it. The Malchus Shva, all the kings, Avol Koidim Shabo Elov, Lenisbared Adai, but before they came to him, they were not sorted out. Dagam she hagilu sheheir al de Shloima, even though the revelation that shone through Shloima Heir Gam Banitzoitzes Sheb, it reached, it shined in the sparks that are in a distant place. Umashach Oisom Love, and it drew them to come to him, so it reached them. But he couldn't change them in the place where they are. But where was the actually birur dafkil achre shabo love? Only after they came to Shlomo. Kamuvan Mizeh has understood from this Gam laachre shemalkus shvo shama Hashem Shlomo. Even after the Malkus Shva heard the hearing of Shlomo, it needed to come to Yerushalayim. Then it became the bitter. Why did she have to come? That means that while she was in his place, the bitter wasn't accomplished. The kivon shabiru shalem hoya loy mitzad atzmo. Since the bitter was not within themselves, el mitzad hagilu sheheir bem, but because of the revelation that shined in them. Lochein habirur shalem hoyu kshabou lahamokim sheshamu hagilu. So therefore, their birur came to the place where the gilui is. So because the gilui draw them, so they come to the gilui. But v'habirur the loss in love. On the other hand, the birur loss in love kiv on shabirur oz. The sorting out them will be al day she's gala mitzas hamitzias. Is by revealing the true existence of the items that are misbarer lochein oz epic el amim. So therefore, then I will turn around to the nation as they are in their existence, in their place. They don't have to come love the Shechem Echad to serve Hashem one shoulder, because there's going to be revealed that their Esem Metzias is godliness. And therefore they don't have to come here. It's not the Gilu that's going to bring them. They themselves in their place will be changed around. Similarly is also in the idea of spreading the wellspring to the outside. That is the preparation. And that's the vehicle, the vessel to bringing Malkum Mashiach. Just like we're saying, the chelik that's going to happen, but in essence, that's actually what's happening now through the way to bring Mashiach. The Toras Achsidus Siprichinas Pnimius Atik. Toras Achsidus, the inner of Atik. Through studying the teaching of Chassidus, and going in the ways, the directions, the roads of Chassidus, the natural powers of the one who occupies in Chassidus, nasis, they become godly powers. Because Chassidus, which is Pnimis Atik, when you bring that down by learning Chassidus, nirgash boy behelam akoponim, so it's felt by him, maybe not openly, but at least in an obscure way, hidden. Shamitis imotzi yamtzil shloi, the Eibishter's real existence is his existence. The Inyan yafutzum and the idea of spreading the well springs to the outside, who shagam bebechinas chutza, so that also when it comes to the outside yiyu, it should be boif in a way to disseminate it. Loi rak hamayim chayim shenimshachim hamayonis, not just the living waters that come from the well. That would be compared if you have the mayim chayim that come from the well. Aderech hagilui, the Chitzonis Atik Shoim Shlomo, that would be like the revelation of Chitzonis Atik was in the times of Shlomo. Sheikir Hagilu Hoya B'Yerushalayim. The main revelation was in Yerushalayim by Shlomo HaMelech. Ela Shahar Mimenu Nimshcha Galam Kevis Rechoikim, but a shine came to far places. But when we say Yafutzu Mayin Nisecha Ela Mayonas Atzmam, to bring the mind themselves. Through bringing the Mayan there, you reveal the entity of the Chutz itself, that their real entity is the well springs. It's not a ha'ore like by Shlomo HaMelech, but you're bringing them to the recognition that that is the true existence. Based on this, we can explain the expression of the Rebbe Rashab, the Inyan Agilu, the Toras HaChassidus shenimshecha al yidei Admor HaZoken la'acharei Peterburg, explaining the idea that Chassidus, the revelation of Chassidus that took place by the Alter Rebbe after his incarceration in Petersburg. So he said, that you can compare this to an olive, that when you crush it, that's when the oil comes out. Why do we compare? Some of the reasons why we compare the revelation after Yutas Kislev to oil is Kishemen. Because Shemen has the quality that while it is separate from everything, that's why it does not mix. Anytime you put a liquid, the oil goes on the top. So it doesn't mix. But yet, it floats through it greases through every item. Hainu. Shashemen atzmei mefafeya b'chol dover. The oil itself floats through in every item. It doesn't just impact it, but it itself finds itself in every item. Similar is as it relates to the revelation of Yutas Kislev. The fact that is when the main idea of your wellspring should go to the outside began. Then who? That is when the revelation of Gilu of Primis Atik. The Primis Atik who moved on the Kol HaYishtalshlus. Primis Atik is distinct from all Ishtalshlus. Achas Kama v'Kama Mechutza. It's not in the Chutza for sure not. That's even more than Chitzonis Atik distinct from the Chutza. Dugmas Hashem Sheina Mesarim B'Shar Mashkim. Similar to oil that doesn't mix into any oil. So the level of Chassidus, the Pnimius Atik, has really no connection in essence to the Chutza. Ba'ava Pikeh. And yet, Umatam Zagufa, that's why, from that reason, Davke, Tanaguf, La'achra Yutis Kislev, Huscha Lo Inyan Futsu Meinesacha Chutza. After Yutis Kislev, only then started that the mayonas can be coming out to the Chutza. Because Pnimius Ati came about. And once Pnimius Ati came about, then there's the revelation, the mayonas themselves, Shabbat Chutza Yesha Mayonas Atzmam, that in the Chutza there is the wells themselves, Dugmas Shemen, Shu Atzmam B'Fafei B'Chol Dover, similar to the oil which floats in every item. So that's why we compare it to Shemen. That's why it started after Yutis Kislev. That special quality of Shemen, while it doesn't mix with anything, but it gets into everything, is mefafeya, floats in everything. And that means that in the chutzah, which is distinct, you reveal that that's part of the mayan itself. And that took place after Yutis Kislev. Yud Beis Val Derech Zeh Hu Hagilui the Chanukah. Similar is also the revelation of Chanukah. Or Befrat Hagilui the Neiros Chanukah. So Chval Chanukah as a festival, especially when we talk about the lamps of Chanukah. Shetiknum Mipnei Hanes Shoy B'Shemen, they were instituted because of the miracle that took place with the oil. Shehu Hagilui the Pnimius Atik. The miracle of Chanukah, especially the miracle of oil, is the revelation of Pnimius Atik. V'zeh shemevuer b'hadrushim d'huva li'il sig beis, and they were explained before in my Mamer that was brought in sig beis. Shamaylos the Neiros Chanukah legabe Neiros Hamikdash, that the advantage of the lights of Chanukah relative to Neiros Hamikdash, who shagilu the Neiros Chanukah who l'mayla me'ishtalshlus. We say that his Neiros Chanukah is higher than ishtalshlus. So we're not saying specifically Pnimius Atik, we just said higher than ishtalshlus. That would seem even Arich, even Chitzonis Atik from the mind. Av sheklos hakeser. So while, even though generally keser gam Arich mikol mishkein Chitzonis Atik, the levels of Arich and Chitzonis Atik who l'mayla me'ishtalshlus is higher than ishtalshlus. So when the Mamer says that Neiros Chanukah are l'mayla me'ishtalshlus yesh loymar, ko'inyan de l'mayla me'ishtalshlus hu shu b'chol mokem l'mayla u'lemato b'shova. When we say higher than ishtalshlus, that means wherever he is, up and down are equal. And that can only be said by Pnimius Atik. That idea higher than Ishtalshus, meaning that there is no difference, is the Pnimius Atik. In Arich and Chitzonis Atik, there is still Milo Matas. Agilu de Chitzonis Atik Hu Be'iker L'Milo. Chitzonis Atik revelation is mainly above Elo Shenimshech U'Poil Gam L'Mato, but it impacts the matter, like by Shlomo. Kanal Sifyud B'Inyan Agilui She'ira De Shlomo. The Gilui that came through Shlomo, which is Agilui De Chitzonis Atik. So over there we spoke about She'ikir Agilui Hoye B'Yerushalayim. The main revelation was Yerushalayim. Elo Shenimshech U'Poil Gam B'Shvo. It also impacts Shvo, but we needed Shvo to come because it is mainly above in Yerushalayim. But when we say that something is higher than the that in all places it's equal, so that is really what happens on Chanukah. That he himself is also lamato. And even more, not only that he himself is lamato, when we have the revelation, when Pnimis Atik is revealed, then there is no difference between Mailamato. Through the revelation, Pnimis Atik Nirgash Bechol Dover, Shamatzias Legufa Elukus, then everything, it's felt that Metzias itself is godliness. Yud Gimel. This why we say that the Ner Chanukah, it's a mitzvah to put it on the outside. The Shusarab said the difference. Unlike the Neiros of the Mikdash, which were on the inside, but they shined on the outside. But here we put it outside. When we say the light of Neiros Chanukah illuminates the darkness of the Shusarabim, it's in a way that he himself is in the Shusarabim. Not that he's in the outside illuminating the Shusarabim, but he's in the Shusarabim. That also explains his manat lakosom. That's why it's also the time of lighting them is when the sun sets. Because this that the light of Neiros Chanukah illuminates the darkness of the night light is loy ba'ofen she'ikre shala'oiru b'yoyim elo shenimshach omeir gam b'laylo. It's not that the main oir is in the daytime, but it also extends and shines out in Lilo. But also in the time of darkness, there is the light itself. So it's Mishatishka Chamo, you light it, because then there is light. The Yisayim is then more than this. The fact, through the fact that the light of Ner Chanukah is in the place, in the time of darkness, which is the Shusarabim Balaylo, in the public domain. The darkness itself gets turned to light. So the Rebbe explains now what he asked in the beginning. The Beis HaMikdash, by Shlomo HaMelech, it was Chitzonis Atik, and Chitzonis Atik functions from the inside that shines to the outside. But Pnimius Atik changes the outside itself. It's under the Shusarabim, it's Mishatishka Chamo. And you change it around that the Cheshach Atzmei Nepachloy. Dal Rav, Zeh yesh levayer hatam al zeh shamshochas gilui zeh is dafke al yedei amsiras nefesh the matisho ubono. That this revelation of Chanukah is dafke through amsiras nefesh of Matisyo and his sons. Below yal yedei amsiras nefesh the Purim. The Rebbe said by Purim we don't find this pursuinis of the Cheshach, the outside. Ki amsiras nefesh. The Matisyo Ubon of Hoitzo. What was it, the Mesiras Nefesh of Matisyo and his sons? Shagam Shoyu Chaloshim Ma'atim, even though they were weak and few. Yet they waged war against mighty ones and many. the she'osu pu'ula b'derkei hateva milchama b'kdei l'natzeach es ha'yimonim. The fact that they did an act in nature, naturally, they waged war in order to beat the Greeks. Hagam she'ei apiteva ein mokim shechaloshim u'ma'atim yinatzchu gebenim v'rabim. Although naturally there is no room for that the weak and the few should override the powerful and the many. So why did they go? Koyamunach etzlam, because by them it was a given, abgelegt. It was a given shegam hateva, that even the nature, the Olam Haza Tacht and Shag Klipas Gevrim, even in the nature of this low world in which the Klipas override, and even when the world is in a condition, the opponents are powerful and many. They realize that even Teva is godliness. That was only by Matisyo. They took nature, and with nature itself, they recognized that this was godly. That understanding, that acceptance, and that given is imitzad hargish, is because of the feeling that his true existence is all existence. That's why through the Matisyon sons they were able to bring down the Gila of Pnimius Atik, because they recognized that the Tachten itself is the Metzias of the Eberster. This was not by Purim, only by the Ness of Chanukah. And this is that the time of Chanukah, ad the Kalya, Rigla de Tarmidoi, until the feet of the Tarmidoi finish marketplace. Tarmidoi is explained to him, that the meaning those who rebel in the heavenly kingdom. Tarmud, the word Tarmud has the same letters as rebellion. By day ner Chanukah nase kalya rigla darmidoi, through the light of Chanukah, this brings about the destruction of the feet of the Tarmidoi. The Shnei Pirushim Bazeh. There's two meanings, and what does it mean? It removes the rigla koloyin, finishes the rigla Tarmidoi. Sha'oir the ner Chanukah mevchala mevatl as rigla the Tarmidoi, that it ceases, or that it changes them around, brings them to a kiloyin. That it impacts that kiloyin, kalya meloshin kiloyin l'klois hanefesh. The word kalya means that it becomes in a way of expiration and expiring of the soul. Even in the feet of the Talmudoi, to change them around, that they should stay in a way of kalya, of kiloyin. Also, those who were rebellious should come to the level of expiration of the soul. And this is the advantage of the birur that took place through the revelation of Chanukah, that it takes the meredes and it brings them to kiloyin legabe habirur. Relative to the bitter that came through what shined in the days of Shlomo. In the days of Shlomo, over there, only those sparks that had some idea, concept of light were able to be sorted out. But not those sparks that have become dark, or certainly those who have not been sorted out, or sparks that are in Talmud, which is Meredes. But but that's the Maila of the revelation of Chanukah, Nasi Kiloyin, Kilois HaNefesh, Gamberigla de Talmudoyin. That brings along the Kilois HaNefesh also in the Rigla Talmudoyin. Move on. So from this, we understand, as we said, the Achon is Afotzis Mayonos Chutza to the Gilu of Mashiach, in which there will be the Gilu of Primis Atik, is La Inyan the Afotzis Mayonos Chutza, to change them around. Shegam Elam, Shem B'matziv Shel Chutza, even those who are in the condition of Chutza, Sheheim Hachi Yorud, they're in the lowest level of outside. Koilul Gam In the Merida Rachman Islam, which includes also those who rebellious, God forbid. When you bring and spread the wellspring to the outside, that negates the entire rebellion that was by them. Afilu rigla de Talmudoi, even the foot of the Talmudoi, which is the regular Bechina Yisachrena, the lowest level in Talmudoi, Kalya, that the rigla becomes a level of Kiloy. The Seder is it. So first you stop him, that they don't rebel anymore. But more than that, it becomes the idea of the expiration, Klois HaNefesh, expiration of the soul. Is similar to what will be in the future to come. Then will be the spirit of impurity I'll remove from the land, and more than just removing it, Kalya, to remove it, but Kiloyim, as Epech, Elamim, Goimer love the Shechem Echad, to all serve Hashem, one shoulder turning around.